How do you inspire kids to love math? And for kids with a specific learning disorder in math, do you approach things differently? What are some strategies that you use to help students who struggle with math? Well, my guest today is going to answer all those questions. Her name is Allison Dillard. She's an adjunct math professor at Irvine Valley College, author of several math books, including Crush Math Now and the Love Math Journal. She's also the host of the Allison Loves Math Podcast. I am thrilled to have her here with me today. Listen in to this conversation.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Allison. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. And how's the summer going for you?
Summer is going good. It's super nice not to have to be in the school routine every morning, just to get to kick back and relax a little bit in the morning. So we're loving it. We definitely needed the break. How about you?
Absolutely. We needed the break as well. Recording this in summer for people who are listening at another time. And we just made the transition from school to summer for my two kids, and they are loving it. I have to tell you, they're very excited about it. And I'm happy to see them as enthusiastic as they are.
Yeah, it's just so nice to have just that downtime and the free time to play. Everything's just so structured during the school year. So it's a wonderful break.
They need it. They need it. And so I'm happy for them that they have it. So like I said, I'm glad to have you here. I wanted to talk about math. We have not talked about math on the podcast yet. And when I thought about who am I going to have on the podcast to talk about math, of course, you came to mind. You are a math professor. You're a math tutor and the host of a math podcast. So there's got to be some love of math there. So Allison, tell me why you love math. I think that's the name of your podcast, right?
Yes. So the podcast is called Allison Loves Math. Yes. Right. And I love math enough that what I do when I'm not teaching is I interview educators and parenting experts about how we can help our kids to love math and succeed in math. So I'm definitely a little obsessed with it, but it's a lot of fun. I guess I would say I love math because I feel like, math gives students, people in general, right, the tools to figure out how to do difficult things. And so, all of the math that we're learning in school, that our kids are learning in school, I don't know. I think I love the fact that it's a challenge, and I love the fact that it's hard for kids, because in learning to figure out how to learn math, they're learning how to do things that are difficult. And I feel like that can be such an empowering journey for students. And so, I feel like that's what I want for our kids to love math and to succeed in it. And I think that's going to help them to build the lives that they want, to go on to make a bigger impact in the world, to solve our world's complex problems. We know our world has a lot of problems, and we need a lot of people out there trying to solve them. And so I think that math gives our kids and our students those tools to do all of those things.
Absolutely. And I love that perspective about doing something that's hard for you, because that's a life skill.
It is. Yes.
We face challenges in life all the time, and being able to persist even when things are hard is just an important life skill to develop. And I love that you are using math as an example of how kids can build those skills.
Right. And I think that, as parents, a lot of times we're trying to make things easier for the kids, and it's like, we want math to be easy. We want success to be easy for them and stuff. But at the same time, actually, it's that struggle, especially in math, that is so beneficial for them.
And do you think, for some reason, it seems that with math, unlike with other subjects, there's a mindset with respect to math. Like I've often hear students say, I'm not good at math, or I'm not a math person. And I don't hear that with other, like I'm not a history person, or I'm not a geography person, but I do hear it with math. What are your thoughts on that? And how does that impact learners?
No, I think it makes such a huge impact, right? Because if you if you believe you can do something, right, usually you'll figure out how to do it, right? Because you believe that you can. And if you don't believe you can do something, you just you give up before you even get started, before you really actually put an effort in to see whether or not you can. And for me, I teach at a community college. I teach at Irvine Valley College, and I teach a lot of the remedial math classes there. And then on the other side, I also have kids who, this last year they were in kinder, they were in third, and they were in fifth grade. So I feel like I'm seeing sort of the two ends of education, right? In terms of where we start off in elementary school versus, where students end up at college, right? And it's interesting teaching a lot of these remedial math classes, which is basically math that's not the four-year college math. It doesn't transfer into a four-year school. So basically they're having to repeat some of the high school math in order to qualify for the college level math, right? So it's the students who really struggled in math. And what I see in terms of the mindset is a lot of these students, they thought that they are not a math person, that they're not capable of doing math, starting in elementary school. And then by the time I see them in college, they've been telling themselves, I can't do math for over a decade. And it's really, really hard to undo it at that point because it's so deeply ingrained in their beliefs. And so one of the things that, I came out with recently, it's cute, but it's a little bit cheesy. It's called the Love Math Journal, and it's for 4th through 8th graders, but it's trying to sort of, address the problem earlier, in their education. So that way, they can start to have a more positive mindset and a more positive learning experience for math at a younger age. Because gosh, if we can fix it early on, then that's a whole decade, right, of learning math where they're approaching it with a more positive mindset.
Absolutely. And there's so much research about mindset and its impact on performance.
Oh,
and,
absolutely.
You talked about the journal. I'd love to hear more about that, because my question regarding the mindset would be, how do you get kids to get past that? And so that it's not adopted early on and they feel like they can be more successful with math.
Right. I think, one of the reasons why I love talking to parents about math is that they're a huge part of that equation, right? I think it's difficult for students when they're having a tough time, say in math class, right? And then they come home to mom and dad and they say, oh, I'm really bad at math. And mom and dad just say, oh, it's okay. It's okay if you're bad at math, and that's just telling them that they are bad at math. And a lot of parents will say, I'm bad at math too. And there's just a lot, there are just so many people who don't like math and who think that they're bad at math. And it's so socially acceptable to talk about how terrible we are at math. But I think that the easiest thing that parents can do is to actually just stop the negative conversation about math, right? And we don't have to lie to our kids and say, oh, yes, you're brilliant at math when they're obviously struggling. But we can just remind them that, it's a challenge, right? And tackling that challenge is a good thing. We can remind them that math is just a skill, right? It's just like learning how to read. It's just like learning how to play soccer or play a musical instrument, right? And it requires practice, right? And consistent practice. And it requires coming back to it, when we make mistakes and stuff like that. So as a parent, I think the messages that we give them probably make the biggest impact of anything.
Absolutely. And is that why your podcast combines parenting and math? It's not just a podcast about math. It really combines that parenting aspect, because particularly early on, parents have a significant role in kind of shaping how kids feel about their own ability to do different things.
Yes, definitely. So the podcast, it's partially for teachers and it's partially for parents, right? Because I feel like those are the two biggest influencers in our kids' success in math, right? One is the teachers and how we speak to the students about math and how we, encourage them. And, I remember talking to one of my old classmates and, I had such a good experience with math in high school. And I attributed a lot of that to the teachers. But it was really interesting because the exact same teacher was actually the reason why she went on, in school to always think that she was terrible in math. And it was because the same teacher told one of us that we're good at math and the other that we're not. And so it's really important, of course, for teachers to think about how they're talking to the students about math and to encourage the ones that are struggling and to let them make mistakes. And then the other voice that our kids are hearing so often is the parents, right? So there's the two sides. And especially with the teachers from the parent perspective, right? We can't necessarily control who our kids have as teachers, but we can totally control how we're talking to our kids, when they're struggling with their math homework.
Absolutely. And, you've got a lot of really great resources on your website, and we're going to link to those in the show notes. And one of the things that I think one of the downloads is 7 secrets that parents of successful math students know. And you've kind of already alluded to the fact that one thing that parents can do is to kind of stop those negative conversations. Are there other things that parents can do to support their children so that they have a more positive attitude toward math?
Great. So a lot of the things that I sort of talked about in there, I've actually condensed into this Love Math journal that I created. And, that comes back to having, positive messages, right? There's lots of little quotes and affirmations in the journal about math, right? Where we can just sort of connect learning challenges with learning math. Because we see that in the classroom a lot. And so students oftentimes attribute that to learning, but they forget about it with math. And then in the journal, there's also lots of prompts just reflecting on how we're approaching math. And I think that can be another really helpful thing that parents can do with their kids is to, ask them how they, for example, if they didn't do well on a test, right? A good thing to do would be to reflect on, well, how did you prepare for the test, right? What did they do to study? Was all the homework completed? What did they study? When did they study? How long did they study? And change things up, right? So I think, change is when things are not working, right? The biggest thing that you can do is just try to change how you're approaching math. And kids don't know how to do that. But as parents, we can sort of walk them through that conversation because, we have more life experience, right? We've had more things over the years that maybe haven't worked out and we've had to change our approach to that. So that's a really important thing that we can teach our kids.
Right. And modeling that, that ability to overcome difficulties or rather persist when things are difficult is important as well, is kind of what I'm hearing in that, we all face things that are difficult and we have to persist. And also that even the people who are greatest at, these high level activities need support and need to practice. I tell my son that all the time with basketball. You don't just show up at a basketball game and just show up for the game without having practiced.
Yeah.
Even the players in the NBA still go to practice. They don't just show up for a championship game. And so I think using those examples of how practice is important, even with math, is important as well.
Yes, I love that. And, I do that a lot too. I think comparing math to sports is a really fun way to help them understand how to approach it. Because I coach my kids' soccer teams and I love the parallels of coaching soccer and coaching math. And I even had one semester where I had my students call me Coach Dillard. And I was like, we're going to approach this the way we would approach soccer, right? We're all on a team. We're all trying to figure this out together. And, our competitor is the math test that we all have to figure out what to do. But with sports, right, exactly what you said, you would never just show up to a game and expect to succeed if you never practice, right? And another thing about that is when we practice, a lot of times we scrimmage, right? Because it's one thing to just do the soccer drill, right? Where you're dribbling back and forth between the cones. And it's another thing to actually be out on the field and try to use those skills to get a goal, right? And so that's another thing that can be really helpful for studying for math tests, right? Is there's the homework aspect of it, but that's only one element. And if you can give your kids a practice test, that's sort of the equivalent to a soccer scrimmage or a basketball scrimmage. And that can be really helpful in terms of helping them to prepare to do the math in a test setting, right? Because there's so many students who have that severe math anxiety, right? And maybe they can do stuff in homework, but then they just panic when they get to the test. So creating those little practice tests for your kids, right? Where you write the homework problem down on a piece of paper and it's just that blank piece of paper and a pencil. And they don't have all of the other crutches, that they maybe have for homework. They don't have Google and friends and conversations and mom and dad's help. That can be a huge help for students who are struggling with math.
That is great. That's really fantastic. I love that. So in the work that I do, I've evaluated a number of students who struggle with math and for a number of reasons. Some have a weakness with math relative to how they do in other subjects. And some have a language-based learning disorder that impacts math, and some struggle with other aspects of math like number sense and have been diagnosed with dyscalculia. How do you approach those kids who may have, a specific learning disorder in math? Is it different in the way you approach them and help them to overcome the math struggles?
I think there's a couple of things that are different in terms of how I approach it. And one is focusing on experimentation a little bit more. I think that the students that I've worked with who have different learning disabilities, and they've all been different and therefore need to learn math in different ways. And a lot of times it's really hard to figure out the best way for them to learn math, right? Whether it's, I don't know, there's so many different things, right? And so I think that the maybe overall idea that I have with students is just to keep changing things up until you find what works for you. So I see that a lot at the community college level with students who just maybe gave up on math at some point early on in high school. And they just said, I just can't learn it. But then as soon as we just start saying, okay, well, maybe the normal way that, I'm teaching math in the classroom and that we're assigning our homework, for example, right, it's just general, right? It's probably not going to be perfect for anybody who's in the class, right? But it's going to work better for some students than others. And if it's really not working well for you, let's just mix it up. And I've had some students where, it turns out that the big homework assignment of like 30 homework problems all on the brand new topic is not anywhere close to sufficient to learning the material, right? And it's way too much all at once. And so as soon as we maybe change it up and we break up the homework assignment, we say, you know what, we're going to do 5 every day and we're going to do it for a longer period of time. And we actually have to do maybe more than the 30 problems, but we break it up differently. At some point, if we keep mixing things up, we find the way that they learn math best. So I guess that would just be my number one piece of advice is that, if the first thing doesn't work, try another and try another. And, sometimes it's like the 8th or 9th or 10th thing, but just don't give up and keep changing things up when things aren't working.
Right. And that's great. And that takes time. It's not something that can happen overnight or with one session. It's trial and error and figuring out, like you said, what works best for that child. And do you get pushback from kids? Because I know that when I try and help my kids with math, it's like they will say, the teacher said not to do it that way, or that's not the way the teacher said to do it. Do you get that as well? Because, teachers have different ways of teaching math. And so do you encourage trying to do things different ways? It seems like that flexibility in thinking would be an important skill to also develop.
Right. So I think my background with all that originally started with math tutoring, right? I started tutoring math in high school and I did it throughout college in my 20s. And it was such a good experience getting to work one-on-one with students who oftentimes were really far behind in math, and maybe just not in a situation where they're being set up to succeed in their math class. And you're right. It was definitely hard. As I think back to every single student, there were definitely times where they just wanted to give up, and they're saying, you know what, I'm making these changes and nothing's happening and it's time and it's energy. And I'm not getting the results that I want yet. And it is hard to encourage them to push through that. Right. So maybe actually another thing, that is really important to keep in mind is who they're studying with, right? And who's teaching them how to learn math, right? And if you can get them with the right person who encourages them and motivates them and gets them wanting to try, and wanting to mix things up in terms of how they're approaching math, that can be really important.
Yeah. And I can see that when you open up the idea of doing math problems in different ways, that helps students, because oftentimes if they think there's only one way to do it and they can't do it that way, then they're not good at math, right?
Yeah.
Then they're not a good math student. Then they just can't do it. And they may even give up. But if you bring in the idea that there can be different ways to solve a problem and we'll figure out what's the best way for you, then that provides opportunity and hope about, their ability to be successful at doing math problems.
Exactly. And then one other thing, as I'm thinking back to, I worked with a number of students on SAT prep. right, for the SAT. And I know that's another thing that can be really hard, right? Because it's timed, there's high pressure because, your college admissions, depend on it and stuff. And one of the things that I did notice in that is that oftentimes there are certain things that students qualify for, right? And oftentimes it's extra time on the SAT. They get time and a half or perhaps double time on it. And one of the things that I so often saw was that students would think whatever accommodations they qualified for, that would solve their problem, right? And if the accommodations didn't solve it, then it wasn't solvable. Where so often it was interesting. There were a lot of times where the extra time on task, as it turned out, didn't matter for the student. It was figuring out how to get through the problems themselves, so sometimes switching up, maybe thinking about, I don't know, especially the time accommodation. If that doesn't seem to be helping, there might be other issues with like foundations, right? Like they might, or size of the math problem, right? If you can write it out larger, that can help. I had one student with like dyslexia who we ended up turning the page sideways and having him check his work that way. And it was so weird, but we only caught it because we just kept on taking these practice tests and changing how he was approaching the problems and looking at blocking different parts of it off. Sorry, I'm rambling now about.
No, you're not. That's really important because, so many of the students that I work with do get extended time because they have slow processing speed or they have a learning disorder or another neurodevelopmental disorder that ADHD that slows them down. But many don't know how to use that extended time when they have it. And sometimes it's not, like you're saying, it's not about needing more time. It's about knowing how to solve the problem that is on the page. And having all the time in the world won't help you if you don't know how to approach the problem.
Right. Or if you know how to approach the problem, but you keep making certain mistakes, right? If you keep switching certain numbers, you're doing lots of calculations and long problems sometimes. And so if you keep making the same mistakes, the extra time doesn't necessarily matter. What you need to do is go back and focus or like track actually, what are the mistakes that I keep making? Because then they can go back and look for the specific mistakes. That can be more helpful than the extra time.
That's great. That's really great advice for parents and students, who have that extended time and want to make the most of it. I listened to your podcast on the importance of statistics, and I have to tell you that I've always loved statistics. In grad school, that was the course that many students dreaded, and I actually loved that class. I taught statistics as a graduate student. I taught a class on it. I'd love for you to share with the listeners in terms of why is statistics important, because I think everyone should know statistics.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm actually in the middle of
I feel like we're really nerding out on math right now.
I love it. No, I love to teach statistics. It is my favorite class to teach at Irvine Valley College. And the reason why I love it is I feel like it's something that we use so much in our everyday life, right? It is, every time that you open up the news, you look at stuff online, if you're, whether it's politics or medical research or anything, there's statistics everywhere, right? And students, people, right, need to understand how to interpret statistics. They need to understand what they mean. They need to understand where they come from, and if you think about it, we have so many different, people and organizations, right? All, fighting for attention, all trying to share their message, right? Whatever it is that they're promoting or trying to get you to believe. And it is really important to be able to make sense of all of that and to know maybe when something comes from a biased source, right? Or maybe when perhaps, an experiment was done, but the sampling methods weren't good, right? And it's all of this stuff lends to the credibility of these statistics that we believe or don't believe. And I think that skill of just being able to, look at what we read in our everyday life and understand what to believe and what not to, and how to look into that, how to dig into that is so important.
Absolutely. And I feel like statistics is a great tool to use to engage students because, like you said, it's connected to, things that we are exposed to every day, things that are critical for life. And you talk about how it's important to everything from cooking to analyzing data, like you're saying in the media,
and managing your finances. If you think about the students who are in high school and are preparing for that transition to college, understanding math and having a number sense and being able to manage your finances, know what interest rates look like if you're going to be using that credit card. All of that is essential.
Yes. Yes. Oh, it's so important. And I think, especially us as adults, we see all of the debt that our generation has gotten into. And so much of that is not understanding interest rates, right? And credit cards and loans and stuff like that. And students have this ability to look at it early and understand it early, right? It's so much easier to avoid getting into unnecessary debt than it is to get out of it. Yeah,
absolutely.
You're right. Math teaches them so much.
It does. It really does. I think even especially now, we're recording this at the tail end of the pandemic, where people are trying to kind of understand the research. Now if we're going to be opening this vaccine up to kids, how many people were in that study, and what was the percentage of kids who had an adverse reaction, and what was that? And so being able to really understand that data, obviously it's important for adults. But, having even kids understand,
right,
at that early age is important too, because I agree with you. I think starting young is the best way to approach math.
Right. And gosh, you're right. The COVID stuff is so interesting in terms of math, right? Because there's the vaccine side, right? In terms of understanding the studies with kids and stuff. But then there's also the actual COVID data itself in terms of how getting COVID affects kids, right? How many kids are actually getting it? How many are having symptoms? How many are having like the long COVID, right? That's something that affects kids. It's not necessarily just the statistic of, how many kids are dying from COVID. There's lots of different aspects to look at, on all sides of it. And it's complicated, right? And I love statistics. And I'm always looking at it and being like, oh man, this is just, and there's a limit to some of the data, right? Because everything is so new. But definitely having that ability to try to figure it out so that way you can make informed decisions is super important.
Absolutely. And I think I'm thinking about parents who have kids who have maybe a neurodevelopmental disorder and are trying to make decisions on treatment, being able to understand the information that you're given in terms of, when you're making a decision on treatment choice, whether it be medication or behavioral management, behavioral therapy, some other forms of intervention. You want to be able to understand what the data is telling you when someone says, oh, this helped my child. And well, that's one child that was helped by that, word of mouth referral. But
right.
Being able to dig into that data yourself and see, what it means and what would be best. I think understanding that data is important as well.
Right. Definitely. And I don't know, sort of going back to the journey of helping your kids figure out what it is that they need, right? Whether it's, medication or different levels of support or whatnot. I had chronic fatigue syndrome back in high school. And that was something that my folks went through was actually, we didn't understand what it was that I had at first. And, this is going to sound really cheesy because I relate everything back to math all the time.
That is okay.
It was, as a parent, I know it was really difficult for them, and they were wading through lots of information and lots of different experts. And ultimately we ended up having to switch the school that I was at, to just, move me into a more supportive or understanding, environment. And, I ended up having to cut back a lot of classes because the load that I originally had just was not, reasonable anymore, for me to do and stuff. And, I think so often I see that difficult journey of them trying to figure out what was best for me as their kid. So that way I could succeed, so I could graduate and go on to school, I see that parallel so often with students trying to figure out how to get their kids through math, right? And it's hard because you can get lots of different, experts telling you lots of different things, and it might work for, one student that seems like they're similar to your kid, but it's actually different, and sometimes really big changes, right, can be the best, right? Sometimes those can help a lot more than these little tiny tweaks that maybe don't always change everything. Also, using that experience and everything that you're going through as a parent, you can teach your kid about that as you're going through it, right? Because it is teaching them how to understand what's best for them and interpret all of the stuff that pertains to them. So, I know it probably depends a little bit on how old your kids are, but if they're older, right, you can share all of that with them and go through and research all of that stuff with them. And that's teaching them real life math, and it's teaching them the value of math. And I don't know. I think that can be really helpful.
I think so too. And I think that when you help students do something like you were saying at the beginning, first you're helping them understand something, and then you're helping them do something that is hard for them. It's incredibly empowering. And I love the work you're doing because you're helping set kids up for success in math and also in STEM and school and in life, because a lot of, like you're saying, the work that goes into understanding math goes into understanding life. Right. And the decisions that we make on an everyday basis and the things that we do on an everyday basis. And, so, we're kind of wrapping up now, but I would love to hear your thoughts on how do you inspire kids to love math? Because I love math, and my kids, I'm pretty sure are loving math too, because they've got two really geeky parents. And so how do you inspire kids to love math?
So I think, the first thing is sort of one thing that we've hit on a bunch, which is just relating math back to real life, right? Where do we see it? Whether it's in cooking or finances or, your own medical journey or educational journey and stuff like that. I think so often math is disconnected to real life. Like somehow like that just gets lost in the classroom, or maybe it's just students don't see it, right? And so if you can help to point that out so they understand the value of it in real life, that helps a lot, right? Because whatever it is that we're doing or we're learning, right, we should always know why we're learning it. And sometimes that gets lost with math. And then the other thing is just going back to, helping them to value learning hard things, right? And so often I feel like the bigger the challenge is with math, the more important it is, right? And if they can see that, right, if they can see, my challenge in getting through this math class, it might be that I have lots of hurdles in the way, but if I can get through that and I can learn how to do that, I can learn how to do anything, really, And so I think helping students to see that and to take pride in figuring it out and their successes and to really celebrate those successes can make a huge difference also.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love everything you just said. And we'll put it on repeat and keep hearing it over and over again. Allison, it's just been such a pleasure talking to you. And if parents want to reach out to you for more information about how to inspire their kids to love math, for tutoring or for other services that you order to get those great downloads on your website, what is the best way for them to reach out to you?
Absolutely. They can find me at AllisonLovesMath.com. And I've got some free resources there, and you can email me, Allison at AllisonLovesMath.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Allison.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here, Karen. This was so fun.
I am so grateful to Allison for coming on the podcast and sharing such great information. There are a number of links in the show notes, so make sure that you check them out. And subscribe to our email list so you can get firsthand knowledge when we are doing webcasts or town halls or when a new podcast episode is about to drop. I look forward to connecting with you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.